what are you doing? He said, oh, I can't sleep. I've got to stay involved. He was telephoning me and the prime ministers and many of the delegates who were at the talks. It was an indication of the president's deep concern about this. And I also recall, you may have forgotten this, 2 years earlier, he was facing re-election. And he called and asked me to return to the United States to assist in the preparation for his first debate with his opponent, who was the Senate minority leader, and I'd been the majority leader. And he said to me, well, you know him better than anybody. You can help in the debate preparation. So I flew from Belfast. We were at a small resort town in upstate New York. And as soon as I arrived, I went in to have dinner with the president, and staff had given me books of briefings, so I was prepared to talk about the debates. We sat down at that first dinner, and he spent the entire evening asking me questions about what was happening in Northern Ireland. On the eve of probably the most important debate in his life up until that time, we talked about Northern Ireland for about an hour and a half, a good indication of where it stood in his sense of priorities. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome my president and dear friend, Bill Clinton.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Senator Mitchell was too modest to tell you the rest of the story. After I grilled him about the situation in Northern Ireland, we had a mock debate. He played Bob Dole, and he beat my brains out. I mean, it wasn't close. It was a humiliating experience, and I thought, thank God I'm not running against George Mitchell. I did pretty good in the debate because he roughed me up so bad. I'd like to make a couple of introductory comments. First of all, when the United States tries to help someone else in a peace process, the narrower the agenda, the easier it is. For example, there was this huge, almost violence-causing boundary dispute between Peru and Ecuador that ended in the Amazon rainforest. I thought, this is nutty. These people have got a great future. So we sent somebody down there, we solved it, and my only role was to send 10 members of the U.S. military to patrol the border at the end point of the dispute in the middle of the rainforest. When I started, those 10 people all wanted to go AWOL. They thought, Bill Clinton's lost his mind, he sent me out here nowhere. By the time the whole thing was over, they never wanted to leave. Then the more people's lives are infected and the more complicated issues are, the deeper it can get. In the end, there are only two things the United States can do to help other people. Now we may need you to come help us, but in the end, we can do our very best to maximize the rewards and minimize the risks of those who are brave enough to seek peace. And then, if we're trusted, we can do our very best to listen with a friendly and caring ear to all the interests and do our best to close the gaps. That's what George did. And he was a genius at it. And I'm very grateful to him. It all started when he was leaving the Senate. I practically jumped off the bridge in Washington, D.C. when he told me he was going to leave the Senate. So I decided to punish him by giving him a part-time job as a special economic envoy to Northern Ireland, which then morphed into being the peace negotiator. And when he woke me up for the 57th time on April the 9th, I was grouching, and he said, "You gave me this part-time job. Now you have to help me succeed." So I thank him. Bertie and Tony and I became close friends. Our families became friends. They were inexhaustible. I'm grateful to them. But I'd also like to say that I'm very grateful to their predecessors, to John Bruton and Albert Reynolds, and to John Major, who made this first declaration before I got involved at all in December of '92, and could well have been deposed because of it. He had a very narrow majority. And thank you, David Trimble, for not taking him down. I'm grateful to all of them, but especially to these guys. We tried to clean it up. The main things that I tried to do was to jumpstart the thing and to give it early confidence. I had become interested in Northern Ireland when I was a student at Oxford. The troubles began when I was a 22-year-old graduate student at Oxford. And all I knew was that my mother's family was Scots-Irish. They were from Fermanagh. They lived in a little house. For the oldest known farmhouse in our family is mid-1700s, just outside Rosalie. And I'm sure that my Scots-Irish Protestant forebears must have intermarried with Catholics just across the border, because I seem so genetically predisposed to try to get you together. But anyway, I cared about it. And then when I was running for president, there was a big block of people in New York who wanted the United States to get involved and appoint a special envoy. And as I prepared for this meeting, I just kept thinking, you know, the Irish diaspora is so big, and there were 44 million people of Irish descent, a huge Irish Catholic community, but an even larger Scots-Irish Protestant community. 25% of all the uniformed soldiers in the history of the United States have been Scots-Irish. And so I thought, you know, if we got organized, we ought to be able to help if there was a willingness to do it. So we started working on it. The first issue that came up is whether I should give Mr. Adams a visa. When the Sinn Féin had indicated they were interested in an end to violence, the State Department looked at me like I had lost my mind. The British press went crazy and said Bill Clinton's just trying to get even with John Major because he searched the passport files of the British government, because we all know Clinton tried to give away his passport so he could go to Russia and become a Soviet citizen to oppose the Vietnam War. Fake news did not begin day before yesterday. So anyway, so the whole thing was silly. Our ambassador to the UK at the time was a very distinguished man who risked his reputation to endorse me in 1992 when I was being attacked for my lack of military service. Admiral William Crowe, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He said, "You can't do this. I won't be able to do my job." I said, "Bill, if I don't do it, your job may not be very fulfilling." So I took a flying leap. And thank you, Jerry Adams, for not betraying my trust and for honoring the commitments you made. And then the thing started. It was hard for David Trimble, but he hung in there. He got a Nobel Prize, but his party lost their leadership within the center-right, as often happens. I'm proud of Seamus Mallon and what he did is in government when you guys stood up Stormont. I talked to John Hume's wife, Pat, today, and I thought, you know, they were the sort of spiritual home for people across the spectrum who believed there had to be an end to violence. But they knew their political position would weaken if an agreement was made, because once an agreement is made, you want the toughest people you can to work out the details. So we wound up with the famous odd couple of McGinnis and Paisley. Now that I could not have mediated. It made it work. And Peter then came along, and I thank you. I thank all of you who served. I see Mark Durkin out there and all these people. They deserve all the credit. They and the citizens groups, the women's groups, all the thousands of Irish kids who wrote me letters, and you know, that was before email. We still had lots of snail mail then, so thank God I've got records of all these letters. But here's what I want to say about it. In the wake of all this tribalism going on all over the world today, all this identity politics, all this, it's almost deeply psychological belief that there has been so much economic change and social dislocation and rearranging the deck chairs and society's hierarchies that people are pulling back. The Good Friday Agreement is a work of genius that's applicable if you care at all about preserving democracy. That's the first point I want to make. Because it called for real democracy, majority rule, minority rights, individual rights, the rule of law, the end of violence, shared political decision-making, shared economic benefits. Shared special relations, maintained the relationship with the United Kingdom, expanded the relationship with the Irish Republic, and then let the future take its course. The most interesting thing was, by creating a space for the identity and the interests and the values of all the people involved in a framework which protected democracy and let future demographic, economic, and political changes take Northern Ireland wherever it would go. It was a work of surpassing genius. And in a world today where there are people who are aggressively trying to destroy the very idea of popular democracy, it embodied everything that I believe works best. I could fill this great hall with the studies that have been done showing that diverse groups make better decisions than homogeneous ones. That compromise actually leads you on a path of progress that is more sustainable than dictation does. So what I want to say to you is, and I know George is going to do some follow-up, but do not underestimate the value of the fact that this was done by people of different parties, different persuasions, and not one damn time, as nearly as I can tell, in the whole process did anyone ever suggest that democracy itself should be abandoned, that the results of elections should not be respected, that some people's votes should be denied, discredited, or that facts were not facts. There is now a whole global industry of academic research on how democracies decline.
We've got a problem there with the picture from Belfast, but Bill Clinton, as we said, a rather frail sounding Bill Clinton at times there, remembering in a very personal way, the build-up to the signing of the Good Friday Agreement some 20 years ago. And we also heard from Senator George Mitchell, former Senator George Mitchell, about the build-up, about the phone calls